The blood-soaked wanted poster fluttered in the wind as Nora Keller stumbled down the dusty main street of Knights Ferry, California, her hands trembling and her once fine blue dress torn at the hem. It was 1876, and the small mining town nestled in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada was just beginning to stir in the golden light of dawn. She kept her face hidden beneath the brim of a hat she'd stolen from a clothesline, her eyes scanning desperately for anywhere to hide. Ethan Abbott wiped down the bar of his saloon, the Frontier, with a damp rag, his mind more on the ledger beside him than the early morning chores. At 28, he'd managed to build something of a life for himself after years of drifting from town to town, taking odd jobs on cattle drives and in mines until he'd won this saloon in a poker game 3 years prior. Knights Ferry wasn't much, but it was becoming home. The door burst open, startling him. The woman who stumbled in was clearly not from around here despite the dirt and grime covering her. The quality of her dress spoke of money. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted around the empty saloon before landing on him. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I need help." Ethan straightened, tossing the rag aside. "Madam, we don't open till noon," but the sound of horses and men shouting outside cut him off. The woman's face drained of what little color it had left. "They're coming," she gasped, backing toward the rear of the saloon. "They'll kill me if they find me." Ethan moved quickly, guided by instinct more than thought. He grabbed her arm and pulled her behind the bar, pointing to a trapdoor in the floor. "Down there, it's our cellar. Stay quiet." She hesitated only a moment before scrambling down the ladder. Ethan closed the trapdoor and kicked the rug back over it just as the saloon door swung open again. 3 men entered, dust coating their clothes, guns hanging low on their hips. The leader, a tall man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, surveyed the room with cold eyes. "We're looking for a woman," he said without preamble. "Came through here not long ago. Blue dress, dark hair." Ethan continued wiping glasses, his face a careful mask of indifference. "Haven't seen anyone like that. Place has been empty since I opened up to clean." The scarred man stepped closer, his spurs jingling against the wooden floor. "You sure about that, barkeep? She's a dangerous woman, killed a man back in Sacramento. There's a reward." "Sorry," Ethan said, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "Can't help you." The men lingered, their eyes roaming the saloon suspiciously before the leader finally nodded. "We'll be staying in town a while. You see her, you let us know. Name's Pike, Josiah Pike." After they left, Ethan waited several minutes before lifting the trapdoor. The woman was huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the day. "They're gone for now," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "But they'll be back." She climbed out, her legs unsteady. Up close, he could see that she was beautiful beneath the dirt and fine features, intelligent eyes, and a stubborn set to her jaw that spoke of strength despite her current state. "Thank you," she said. "I should go." "I can't stay here. They'll search every building eventually." "Who are they? And who are you?" She hesitated, wariness flickering across her face. "My name is Nora Keller. Those men work for my stepfather, James Blackwell. He's a powerful man in Sacramento, a banker and investor." "And did you kill someone like they said?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "No, that's a lie they're spreading to make it easier to bring me back." She paused, seeming to weigh how much to tell him. "My mother died 3 months ago. After the funeral, I discovered evidence that my stepfather had poisoned her slowly over time to gain control of her estate. When he realized what I knew, Her voice faltered. "He tried to make it look like I was unstable, said I was delusional with grief. He was going to have me committed to an asylum." Ethan considered her story. It could be true, or she could be spinning tales. But something in her eyes spoke of genuine terror, and he'd seen enough of the world to know that powerful men often got away with terrible things. Why Knights Ferry? You're a long way from Sacramento. I didn't choose it. I've been running for 2 weeks, taking whatever transportation I could find. I just ended up here. She moved toward the door. I appreciate your help, but I need to keep moving. Outside, they could hear the men questioning people on the street. Ethan moved to block her path. "They'll kill me if I return," she said quietly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Something in Ethan shifted then, a decision made in the space between heartbeats. "Then you're staying right here," he said firmly. Nora's eyes widened. "You don't understand. These men won't stop. Blackwell has connections everywhere. I understand well enough," Ethan interrupted. "And I'm not suggesting you stay in the saloon. I have a cabin about 3 miles outside of town. It's remote enough that they won't find it easily." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Ethan thought about his own past, about the people who had looked the other way when he'd needed help most. "Let's just say I've been on the wrong side of powerful men before. Get yourself cleaned up in the back room. There's water and soap. When it's dark, we'll slip out of town." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Ethan opened the saloon at noon as usual, serving drinks and keeping his ears open to the talk around him. Pike and his men made themselves known, flashing money and asking questions. By evening, the story they were spreading had grown now. Nora was said to have killed not just a man, but her own mother as well. When the last customer finally left and Ethan locked the front door, he found Nora in the back room, wearing men's clothes. He'd provided a shirt too big for her slender frame and pants held up with suspenders. "You look like a proper cowboy now," he said with a small smile. She didn't return the smile. "This won't work. They'll find me and then they'll kill you too. They have to find us first." Ethan grabbed a saddlebag he'd packed earlier. "There's a horse waiting out back. We'll take the creek bed for a while to hide our tracks." The night air was cool as they slipped out the back door of the saloon. Ethan had saddled his sturdy buckskin gelding, Thunder, who stood patiently as they mounted Nora in front, Ethan behind. He kept the horse at a walk until they were well away from town, then guided him into the shallow creek that wound through the hills. They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the splash of the horse's hooves in water and the occasional call of a night bird. Finally, Ethan turned the horse up a narrow path that climbed steeply into the foothills, eventually emerging into a small clearing where a cabin stood, its dark shape barely visible in the moonlight. "It's not much," Ethan said as he helped Nora down from the saddle. "But it's sturdy and most folks in town don't even know it exists." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs and shelves stocked with provisions. Ethan lit a lantern, careful to keep the light low. "I'll sleep outside," he said, gathering a blanket. "You take the bed." Nora caught his arm. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Ethan sighed, setting the lantern down. 10 years ago, I was accused of something I didn't do, stealing from the ranch where I worked. The owner was well respected and I was just a hired hand. No one believed me." He shrugged. "I ended up spending 6 months in jail before the real thief was caught. By then, my reputation was ruined in that town. I'm sorry that happened to you. It's in the past. But I learned that justice isn't always just, especially when there's a difference in power." He moved toward the door. "Get some rest. We'll figure out a more permanent plan tomorrow." "Ethan," she called softly as he reached for the door handle. "Thank you." He nodded once before slipping outside, leaving Nora alone with her thoughts and the soft glow of the lantern. The next morning, Ethan woke at dawn, stiff from sleeping on the ground. He built a small fire to make coffee, keeping the smoke thin to avoid detection. When Nora emerged from the cabin, her face was cleaner and her hair neatly braided, though the borrowed clothes still hung comically large on her frame. "I've been thinking," she said, accepting a cup of coffee. "I need proof of what Blackwell did. There's a ledger in his office that shows irregular payments to my mother's doctor, and letters from the doctor questioning the treatments Blackwell insisted on. If I could get those." "You want to go back?" Ethan asked incredulously. "Not to Sacramento, but he has a hunting lodge near Sonora. He goes there once a month, usually around the full moon. The ledger might be there. It's closer than Sacramento and less well-guarded." Ethan frowned. "That's still dangerous." "I can't run forever," Nora said firmly, "and I won't let my mother's murder go unpunished." Over the next few days, they fell into an uneasy routine. Ethan would ride into town each evening to tend to his saloon and gather information, returning to the cabin late at night. Nora spent her days making the cabin more livable, repairing what she could and organizing their meager supplies. They learned about each other in bits and pieces: Nora's childhood in Sacramento as the daughter of a wealthy widow, Ethan's years traveling the West after leaving home at 16. A week passed with no sign that Pike and his men had discovered their hiding place, though they remained in Knights Ferry, drinking heavily and growing increasingly frustrated with their fruitless search. "They're offering more money now," Ethan reported one night as they sat by the fire. $500 for information leading to your capture." Nora's fingers tightened around her cup. "That's a fortune. Someone will talk eventually." "Maybe, but folks around here are wary of strangers flashing too much money, and Pike's men have made enemies with their rough ways." He hesitated. "The full moon is in 3 days. If we're going to try for that lodge, we should leave tomorrow." The journey to Sonora took them through rugged country. They traveled mainly at night to avoid being seen, staying off the main trails and making camp in hidden valleys. Ethan was impressed by Nora's resilience. She never complained, even when they had to ride through a sudden summer thunderstorm that left them both soaked to the skin. On the second night, as they huddled beneath a rocky overhang while rain pounded the ground around them, something shifted between them. Perhaps it was the close quarters or the vulnerability of their situation, but the conversation deepened as Nora spoke of her mother's illness and the growing suspicions that had eventually led her to flee. "She changed after she married him," Nora said quietly, staring into their small fire. "Became anxious, forgetful. The doctor said it was a woman's nervous condition, but now I know it was the poison working on her mind before it took her body." "How did you figure it out?" Ethan asked. "Little things at first. Blackwell insisting on administering her medicine himself. The way he prevented her old friends from visiting. Then after the funeral, I found her journal. She'd been documenting her symptoms, writing down her suspicions." Nora's voice hardened. "When I confronted Blackwell, he laughed. Actually laughed. Said no one would believe me over him, and that my wild accusations were proof of my own unstable mind." Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness. "We'll get the proof," he promised. Their fingers remained intertwined long after the conversation ended. They reached the outskirts of Sonora the following evening. Blackwell's hunting lodge stood on a hill overlooking the town, a large, imposing structure surrounded by pine trees. From their vantage point in a dense thicket, they watched as a carriage arrived and James Blackwell himself stepped out, followed by several companions. "That's him," Nora whispered, her face pale in the gathering dusk. "And the man behind him is Dr. Morris. He was treating my mother." Ethan studied the lodge, noting the positions of the guards and the patterns of movement as servants carried luggage inside. They'll be occupied with dinner soon. That's our best chance to get inside." As darkness fell, they made their way closer to the lodge, staying within the tree line. Ethan had brought a small pistol for Nora, though she admitted she'd never fired one before. They waited until laughter and the clink of glasses could be heard from the dining room before approaching the back of the house. A single guard stood by the rear entrance, smoking a cigarette and looking bored. Ethan crept up behind him, striking him with the butt of his revolver just hard enough to render him unconscious. They dragged him into the trees and bound him with strips of cloth. "His office will be upstairs," Nora whispered as they slipped inside. "Second door on the left if it's arranged like his Sacramento house." The lodge was warm and well lit, the walls adorned with hunting trophies and expensive paintings. They moved silently, freezing at every creaking floorboard. From the dining room came the sound of men's voices, growing louder with drink and merriment. They found the office exactly where Nora had predicted. It was a handsome room with leather-bound books lining the walls and a massive desk dominating the center. Nora immediately began searching the desk drawers while Ethan kept watch at the door. "It's here," she said after a tense minute, holding up a leather-bound ledger and a bundle of letters tied with string. "And more than I expected. Look at this." She showed him a document bearing the seal of a bank in San Francisco. "This is a transfer of all my mother's holdings to Blackwell's name, supposedly signed by her 3 days before she died. But that's impossible. She could barely hold a pen by then." A sound in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps approached, then paused outside the door. Ethan pulled Nora behind the desk just as the door opened, revealing a young maid carrying a tray of brandy. She gasped when she saw them, the tray wobbling dangerously in her hands. "Please," Nora whispered urgently. "Don't scream." "We won't hurt you." The maid's eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't call out. Instead, she whispered, "Are you Miss Keller, Mr. Blackwell's stepdaughter?" Nora nodded cautiously. "I knew your mother," the maid said, her voice barely audible. "I was her lady's maid in Sacramento before." She swallowed hard. "Before Mr. Blackwell brought me here and told everyone in Sacramento I'd stolen jewelry and run away. Understanding passed between the women." "What's your name?" Nora asked. "Lucy, miss." "Lucy, we need to get out of here without being seen. Is there another way?" The maid nodded. "The servants' stairs at the end of the hall. No one uses them at this hour." She hesitated, then added, "Take me with you, please. He's not a good man." There was no time to debate. They followed Lucy down the narrow servants' staircase and through a storage room that led outside. They were halfway to the trees when a shout rang out behind them. "There, by the woodshed!" A shot cracked through the night air, splintering bark from a tree near Ethan's head. He pushed both women ahead of him as they ran, more shots following them into the darkness. They reached their horses, Lucy riding double with Nora, and galloped away from the lodge, taking a different route than the one they'd used to approach. They didn't slow until they were several miles away, the sounds of pursuit lost in the distance. Ethan led them to a small cave he'd noticed on their journey, hidden behind a waterfall that would mask their tracks. "They'll be searching all the roads," he said as they settled inside the damp but secure hiding place. "We'll have to stay here until morning at least." Lucy was shivering, more from shock than cold. Nora wrapped an arm around the young woman's shoulders. "I'm sorry we've dragged you into this, but thank you for helping us." "I'm glad to be away from there," Lucy said. "Mr. Blackwell, he's done terrible things, not just to your mother." Through the night, Lucy told them what she knew, how Blackwell had a history of marrying wealthy widows who subsequently fell ill, how he'd silenced anyone who asked too many questions. She confirmed what Nora had suspected, that Dr. Morris was complicit, prescribing treatments that were slowly poisoning Nora's mother. "We have enough to go to the authorities now," Nora said, clutching the ledger and letters. "Between these documents and Lucy's testimony, it won't be enough," Ethan interrupted gently. "Blackwell has influence with local lawmen. We need to take this to a federal marshal, someone beyond his reach." "There's a marshal's office in Stockton," Lucy offered. "My brother worked for them as a clerk last year. He said Marshal Wilson is honest, can't be bought." They agreed to head for Stockton at first light. The cave was cramped, forcing them to sleep close together for warmth. Ethan found himself acutely aware of Nora beside him, of the trust she'd placed in him and the risk she was willing to take for justice. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly when he thought the others were asleep. Nora's eyes opened, reflecting the faint moonlight that filtered through the waterfall. "Yes," she admitted, "but not like before. Before, I was afraid of dying without anyone knowing the truth. Now I'm just afraid of failing." "You won't fail," Ethan promised. "We won't let that happen." Her hand found his in the darkness, a silent acknowledgement of the we that had formed between them. Dawn brought clear skies and the decision to split up. Lucy would take the most direct route to Stockton with the evidence, while Ethan and Nora would create a diversion by heading in the opposite direction to draw off any pursuit. They would meet in Stockton in 3 days. "Be careful," Nora told Lucy as they parted ways. "And thank you." "For everything." Lucy squared her shoulders, the documents safely hidden in her bodice. "I'm doing this for your mother, too. She was kind to me when few others were." As Lucy rode east toward Stockton, Ethan and Nora headed southwest, deliberately leaving clear tracks for the first few miles before crossing a wide stream to obscure their trail. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. By midday, they spotted riders on a ridge behind them, at least 5 men moving fast. "Pike," Ethan said grimly. "They must have guessed we'd head this way." They urged their horses faster, cutting through a dense forest where the riders would have trouble following. The pursuit continued through the afternoon, the distance between them and Pike's men growing and shrinking as the terrain changed. By evening they were both exhausted, their horses lathered with sweat. "We need to stop," Ethan said as twilight deepened around them. "The horses can't go much further without rest." They found shelter in an abandoned miner's shack tucked into the side of a hill. It was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it offered concealment. After caring for the horses as best they could, they barricaded the door with the shack's few pieces of broken furniture. "They'll find us by morning," Nora said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Ethan checked his revolver, counting the remaining bullets. "Then we'll have to make our stand here." The night grew cold, but neither suggested building a fire that might reveal their location. They huddled together on the dirt floor, sharing a single blanket and what remained of their food. The intimacy of their situation wasn't lost on either of them. "If we get through this," Ethan said after a long silence, "what will you do?" Nora considered the question. "I hadn't thought beyond proving Blackwell's guilt. I suppose I'll return to Sacramento, sort out my mother's affairs." She paused. "What about you? Will you go back to your saloon in Knights Ferry?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never stayed in one place very long." "Why did you stay there, then?" In Knights Ferry, Ethan shifted, his arm brushing against hers beneath the blanket. "It was the first place that felt like it could be home. But now—" He didn't finish the thought, but his eyes held hers in the darkness. "Now," she prompted softly, "now I'm not sure home is a place anymore." The implication hung between them, unspoken but understood. Nora's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned forward until her lips met his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Ethan responded, pulling her closer, the gentleness gave way to a hunger that surprised them both. They broke apart at the sound of a branch snapping outside, instantly alert. Ethan moved to the single window, peering carefully through a crack in the shutters. "Someone's out there," he whispered. "Just one, moving slowly." They waited in tense silence as footsteps circled the shack. Then came a soft knock at the door. "Ethan, Nora, it's me, Lucy." Stunned, they removed the barricade and opened the door to find Lucy standing there, her face streaked with dirt and a determined expression in her eyes. "How did you find us?" Nora asked as they ushered her inside. "Followed the same tracks Pike's men did, but kept my distance." Lucy sank onto the floor, clearly exhausted. "They've split up to surround this area. They know you're close." "Why didn't you go to Stockton?" Ethan demanded. "You have the evidence. I hid it," Lucy said. "In a hollow tree about a mile back. Marked it with 3 notches. But I couldn't leave you to face them alone, not after you helped me escape." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "That was brave but foolish. We need that evidence to reach Marshal Wilson. And we need to get out of here before Pike's men close in," Nora added. "How many did you see?" "At least 8. They're setting up camps in a circle around this area, planning to close in at dawn, I think." Ethan moved to the window again, studying the darkness. "We can't wait until morning. We need to move now, while they're still setting up." They gathered their few possessions and slipped out of the shack, leading their horses quietly until they were far enough away to mount. Lucy rode with Nora again, directing them to where she'd hidden the documents. The night was moonless, making travel difficult but also providing cover from their pursuers. They retrieved the hidden papers and continued east, pushing their tired horses as hard as they dared. Dawn found them still riding, the rolling hills giving way to more open country. They stopped briefly at a creek to rest the horses and plan their next move. "Stockton is still a day's ride," Lucy said, pointing east. "But there's a small settlement called Copper Springs about 3 hours from here. They have a telegraph office." "We could send a message to Marshal Wilson," Nora suggested. "Ask him to meet us somewhere closer." Ethan nodded. "It's worth trying, but we need to be careful. Blackwell might have men watching telegraph offices for messages about him." They reached Copper Springs by mid-morning, a dusty collection of buildings that served the local ranches and mines. While Lucy and Nora waited out of sight, Ethan went to the telegraph office, sending a carefully worded message requesting a meeting with Marshal Wilson regarding evidence of financial crimes and murder. He gave their location as Jenny Lind, a small town halfway between Copper Springs and Stockton. As Ethan left the telegraph office, he noticed 2 men watching him from across the street, strangers with the hard look of hired guns. He walked casually to the general store, but when he emerged, the men were gone. "We need to move," he told Nora and Lucy when he rejoined them behind the livery stable. "I think Blackwell has men here." They were mounting their horses when shots rang out, bullets kicking up dust at their feet. Ethan returned fire, providing cover as Nora and Lucy galloped away. He followed, ducking low in the saddle as more shots followed them out of town. They rode hard for several miles before veering off the road into a stand of trees. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, then stopped altogether. They continued at a more measured pace, taking care to hide their tracks when possible. "How did they know we'd be in Copper Springs?" Lucy wondered aloud. "They probably have men watching all the settlements in the area," Ethan said. "We were unlucky." By late afternoon, they reached Jenny Lind, approaching cautiously in case it too was being watched. The town was larger than Copper Springs, with several saloons and a proper hotel. They found a spot in the hills overlooking the town and made camp, deciding it was safer than entering the town itself. One of us should go down at nightfall, Ethan suggested. Check if Wilson has responded to our message. I'll go, Lucy volunteered. No one's looking for me specifically. I can blend in better than either of you. Reluctantly, they agreed. When darkness fell, Lucy changed into her maid's dress, which would attract less attention than her borrowed men's clothes, and made her way into town. Ethan and Nora waited anxiously, watching the distant lights of Jenny Lind and listening for any sign of trouble. She's brave, Nora said softly. Ethan nodded. Reminds me of someone else I know. Nora smiled slightly, leaning against him. I wasn't brave when we first met, just terrified. Brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs doing despite the fear. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the events of the past days weighing on them both. The kiss they'd shared in the miner's shack remained unmentioned but not forgotten, a current of tension humming beneath their conversation. When this is over, Nora began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Ethan waited, giving her time to find the words. When this is over, I'd like to know if what's happening between us is real or just because of these circumstances. It's real for me, Ethan said simply. Though I didn't expect it, Nora's hand found his. It's real for me too. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. They reached for their weapons, only lowering them when Lucy's familiar form emerged from the darkness. Marshal Wilson is in Jenny Lind, she reported breathlessly. He was already there investigating another matter. He wants to meet us at the church at midnight. The church stood on the edge of town, its white steeple visible in the starlight. They approached cautiously, leading their horses and staying in the shadows. A single lantern burned inside, its light visible through the windows. I'll go first, Ethan said, handing his reins to Nora. If anything seems wrong, ride away as fast as you can. He approached the church from the rear, peering through a window before entering through a side door. Inside, a tall man in a marshal's coat stood near the altar, his badge catching the lantern light. Alone. Marshal Wilson. Ethan called softly. The man turned. You must be Abbott. Where's the evidence your message mentioned? After ensuring the marshal was indeed alone, Ethan signaled for Nora and Lucy to join them. Inside the church, they laid out the ledger letters and forged documents on a pew. Wilson examined them carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This is damning, he said finally. Financial fraud, forgery, and evidence pointing to murder. But Blackwell is a powerful man with connections in Sacramento. We'll need to build an airtight case. Will our testimony help? Lucy asked. I worked in the Blackwell household. I saw things. Wilson nodded. Every witness helps, but this won't be simple. Blackwell's reach is long, and you three are in danger as long as you're in this area. He thought for a moment. There's a U.S. attorney in San Francisco who's been trying to build a case against corrupt officials and businessmen. With this evidence and your testimonies, he could move against Blackwell. San Francisco is a long journey from here, Nora said, glancing at Ethan. I can provide an escort, Wilson offered. 2 of my deputies. We'll leave at dawn. They spent what remained of the night in the church, taking turns keeping watch. When morning came, Wilson returned with his deputies, solid, trustworthy-looking men named Harris and Donovan. They set out for San Francisco as the sun rose, taking back roads to avoid main thoroughfares where they might be spotted. The journey was tense but uneventful for the first day. They made camp in a secluded valley, setting watches through the night. Ethan took the last watch before dawn, sitting with his back against a tree, his rifle across his knees. Nora joined him as the eastern sky began to lighten. Couldn't sleep, he asked as she settled beside him. Too many thoughts, she admitted. About what happens when we reach San Francisco. About what happens after. After, Ethan repeated. I've been thinking about that too. And he turned to face her, his expression serious. I've spent most of my life wandering, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But lately, I've been thinking about what it might be like to stop wandering. Because of Knights Ferry? Nora asked softly. No, Ethan said, his hand finding hers. Because of you. The moment was interrupted by a warning shout from Deputy Harris. Riders were approaching at least a dozen, moving fast. Pike, Ethan said grimly, helping Nora to her feet. They must have picked up our trail. The camp erupted into activity as everyone rushed to gather their belongings and saddle the horses. Wilson positioned his deputies to provide covering fire as the others mounted. Head for the ridge, Wilson ordered, pointing to a rocky outcropping to the west. We'll hold them off here, then follow. Ethan shook his head. We stay together. No time to argue, Wilson snapped. Go now. The first shots rang out as Ethan, Nora, and Lucy galloped away, ducking low in their saddles. Behind them, Wilson and his deputies returned fire, the sound of gunshots echoing across the valley. They reached the ridge and took cover among the rocks, watching anxiously as Wilson and his men fought a retreating action, gradually falling back toward their position. Deputy Donovan fell, clutching his shoulder, but managed to remount his horse with Wilson's help. When the lawmen finally reached the ridge, they were breathing hard, their horses lathered with sweat. Donovan's wound was bleeding badly. We need to keep moving, Wilson said, helping the injured deputy. They'll be on us again soon. They continued westward, pushing their tired horses as hard as they dared. By midday, they reached a small river, following it north to obscure their tracks. The deputy's condition worsened, his face pale and his shirt soaked with blood despite the makeshift bandage. There's a ranch about 5 miles ahead, Harris said, supporting his partner in the saddle. Friends of mine. They'll help us. The ranch belonged to a family named Coleman, a weather-beaten man in his 50s, his wife, and their 3 adult sons. They took in the fugitives without question when Harris explained the situation, providing food, fresh horses, and medical attention for Donovan. Pike's men won't find you here, Coleman assured them as his wife tended to the wounded deputy. My boys will keep watch on the approaches. Anyone comes nosing around, you'll have plenty of warning. They spent the night at the Coleman ranch, grateful for proper beds and hot food. The next morning, leaving Donovan in the care of the Colemans, they continued towards San Francisco with renewed determination. Wilson estimated they would reach the city by the following evening if they maintained a good pace. The last day of their journey passed without incident, the landscape gradually changing as they neared the coast. By late afternoon, they caught their first glimpse of San Francisco Bay, the city spreading along its shores like a promise of civilization and safety. They reached the city as darkness fell, the streets crowded with people, and the air filled with the sounds and smells of urban life. Wilson led them to a modest hotel where they could rest while he contacted the U.S. attorney. Stay inside, he warned. Even in San Francisco, Blackwell might have eyes watching. Exhausted from their journey, they obeyed gladly, taking rooms on the second floor of the hotel. For the first time in weeks, Nora allowed herself to relax slightly, taking a proper bath and changing into a dress provided by the hotel owner's wife. When she emerged from her room, she found Ethan waiting in the small sitting area between their rooms, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes. You look different, she said with a small smile. So do you, he replied, his eyes taking in the simple but elegant dress that fit her much better than the borrowed men's clothes she'd been wearing. More like the woman who burst into my saloon that morning. That feels like a lifetime ago. They sat together on a small sofa, the events of the past weeks hanging between them like a shared dream. Ethan's hand found hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "What happens tomorrow?" he asked. "Wilson says we'll meet with the U.S. attorney in the morning. Give our statements, hand over the evidence. After that." She shrugged. "I suppose it depends on how quickly they can move against Blackwell. And after Blackwell," Nora met his gaze steadily. "After Blackwell, I'll need to decide what kind of life I want to build. And who I want to build it with." Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "I'm not a wealthy man. I have a saloon in a small town and a cabin in the hills. It's not much to offer someone like you." "Someone like me," Nora repeated thoughtfully. "You mean someone who's been running for her life, sleeping in caves and abandoned shacks, and riding across half of California to escape a murderer." She smiled. "I think I've learned what matters, Ethan, and it's not fine houses or fancy clothes." Their lips met in a kiss that held both promise and question. When they separated, Ethan's eyes were serious. "When this is over," he said, "come back to Knights Ferry with me. Not forever if you don't want. Just long enough to see if what we've found together is something we want to keep." Before Nora could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Wilson entered, his expression grim. "Pike's in the city," he said without preamble. "One of my contacts just spotted him and two of his men at the ferry terminal. They're asking questions, showing your description around." "How did they find us so quickly?" Lucy asked, joining them from her adjacent room. "San Francisco isn't that big, and Pike knows his business," Wilson said. "We need to move you somewhere safer until the meeting with the attorney tomorrow." They gathered their few belongings and followed Wilson downstairs, slipping out through a service entrance into an alley behind the hotel. Wilson led them through a maze of streets to a different part of the city, eventually stopping at a 3-story building near the waterfront. "My brother's place," he explained as he knocked on a side door. "He runs a shipping business. The upper floor is secure, and Pike doesn't know about our connection." Wilson's brother, Edward, was a stout man with the same steady gaze as the marshal. He showed them to the top floor of the building, where a large open space had been converted into living quarters. "No one will find you here," Edward assured them. "And even if they did, the only way up is that staircase. Easy to defend." Wilson left to make final arrangements for their meeting with the U.S. attorney, promising to return at dawn. Edward brought them a simple but filling meal before retiring to his own quarters downstairs, leaving them alone in the large room with its windows overlooking the bay. "One more night," Nora said, standing by the window and gazing out at the lights of ships in the harbor. "By this time tomorrow, it might all be over." "One way or another," Ethan agreed, joining her. Lucy had already retired to a curtained alcove, leaving them in a small bubble of privacy. Nora turned to face Ethan, her expression resolute. "I never answered your question," she said. "About coming back to Knights Ferry with you." Ethan waited, his heart beating a little faster. "Yes," Nora said simply. "Yes, I'll come back with you. To see if what we've found is something we want to keep." The kiss that followed held more than the tentative exploration of their previous embraces. This was a seal on a promise, an acknowledgement of feelings that had grown in the crucible of danger and shared purpose. When Wilson returned the next morning, they were ready. The U.S. attorney's office was located in a grand building in the heart of San Francisco, its marble steps and columns projecting an air of solemnity and power. They were ushered into a private office where a thin, sharp-eyed man introduced himself as Attorney Lawrence Reynolds. For the next several hours, they presented their evidence and gave their testimonies. Reynolds listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly allowing them to tell their stories uninterrupted. When they finished, he gathered the documents carefully. "This is the most comprehensive case against Blackwell I've seen," he said, his tone measured but his eyes gleaming with professional interest. "I've been aware of his activities for some time, but gathering evidence has been challenging. With what you've provided, I can secure warrants immediately." "How quickly can you move against him?" Wilson asked. "I've already sent telegrams to the marshals in Sacramento," Reynolds replied. "They'll arrest Blackwell by nightfall. His associates, including Dr. Morris, will be taken into custody as well." "What about Pike and his men?" Ethan asked. "They'll be arrested too, on charges of attempted murder and kidnapping." Reynolds looked at Nora. "Miss Keller, you'll need to remain in San Francisco for the time being. Your testimony will be crucial when this goes to trial." Nora nodded, her expression solemn. "I understand." "How long will that be?" "Difficult to say. Weeks, possibly months." Reynolds softened slightly. "But you'll be under federal protection. Blackwell won't be able to reach you, no matter how many men he sends." They left the attorney's office with mixed emotions: relief that justice was finally in motion, but uncertainty about the long road ahead. Wilson escorted them back to Edwards' building, where they would remain until arrangements could be made for more permanent accommodations. "It's not over," Nora said that evening as they sat together on the roof of the building, watching the sunset over the bay. "But it's begun, finally." Ethan took her hand. "I'll stay with you in San Francisco until it's over." "What about your saloon, your cabin?" "They'll keep," he said with a shrug. "I've got a good man running the saloon anyway. The cabin," he smiled, "well, it'll be there when we're ready to go back." The weeks that followed settled into a strange new pattern. They were moved to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, guarded by federal agents. Lucy decided to stay as well, finding work as a companion to an elderly woman who lived nearby. News arrived piecemeal: Blackwell's arrest had made headlines across California. Other women came forward with similar stories, widows who had escaped his attention before their fortunes could be taken. Dr. Morris confessed, hoping for leniency, and implicated Blackwell in not just Nora's mother's death but 3 others over the past decade. Pike remained at large for a time, evading the marshals who sought him. But his freedom was short-lived. He was shot dead in a saloon in Stockton when he resisted arrest. 2 months after their arrival in San Francisco, the preliminary hearings began. Nora testified clearly and confidently, her voice never wavering as she recounted her mother's slow decline and Blackwell's threats. When she stepped down from the witness stand, the judge ordered Blackwell held for trial without bail. Outside the courthouse, Nora took a deep breath of the salt-tinged air. "He looked smaller," she said, "sitting there in chains, not the powerful man I feared." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Men like him always look smaller when their power is stripped away." The trial itself was scheduled for the spring, 6 months away. Reynolds advised them that they could return to Knights Ferry in the meantime, provided they remained available to return to San Francisco when needed. "It's over enough," he assured them. "Blackwell is finished. His assets are frozen, his reputation destroyed. Even if by some miracle he escaped conviction, he'd never regain his former position." They returned to Knights Ferry in November, as the first chill of winter crept into the air. The town looked much as they had left it, though the saloon had thrived under the management of Ethan's bartender, a reliable older man named Frank, who was happy to continue running day-to-day operations. The cabin in the hills became their home, not just a hideout now, but a place they improved together. Ethan added a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. Nora planted a garden and made curtains for the windows. They rode into town regularly, gradually becoming a familiar sight to the townspeople. The saloon owner and the lady from Sacramento who had survived such an ordeal. Lucy joined them in January, having decided that city life wasn't for her after all. She took a position as schoolteacher in Knights Ferry, boarding with the widowed Mrs. Hollister and bringing a new energy to the small school. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came the summons they had been expecting. They were required in San Francisco for Blackwell's trial. The journey was different this time, taken on regular stage coaches with no need for secrecy or haste. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with Nora spending 2 days on the witness stand. Blackwell's attorneys tried to paint her as unstable, even suggesting she had poisoned her own mother, but the evidence was too strong, the testimony too consistent. When the jury delivered their verdict guilty on all counts, Nora wept quietly, years of tension finally releasing. Blackwell was sentenced to hang, though this was later commuted to life imprisonment when he provided evidence against other corrupt officials in Sacramento. Dr. Morris received 20 years for his role in the murders. The journey back to Knights Ferry was quiet, both Ethan and Nora lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until they were approaching the familiar hills surrounding the town that Nora broke the silence. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said, "now that it's truly over." Ethan glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "I received a letter from my mother's lawyer," Nora continued. "With Blackwell's assets seized and my mother's will properly executed, I've inherited a considerable sum, enough to build a new life anywhere I choose." Ethan's expression remained carefully neutral. "And where would you choose?" Nora smiled then, reaching for his hand. "I was thinking we might expand the saloon, add a proper hotel above it. Knights Ferry is growing and the stagecoach line brings more travelers through every month." Ethan repeated, hope creeping into his voice. "If you'll have me as a partner, in business and in life." They were married in the church in Knights Ferry 2 months later, with Lucy as maid of honor and Marshall Wilson making the journey from Stockton to attend. The town turned out in force for the celebration, curious about the couple whose story had made newspapers across California. The Frontier Hotel opened the following spring, a handsome 2-story building that quickly became the centerpiece of Knights Ferry's Main Street. Ethan continued to oversee the saloon, while Nora managed the hotel, bringing a level of comfort and refinement that attracted an increasingly prosperous clientele. They kept the cabin in the hills, spending weekends there when the demands of their businesses allowed. It was there, on a warm evening in early summer, that Nora told Ethan she was expecting their first child. "Are you happy?" she asked as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Ethan pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. "When you stumbled into my saloon that morning, I never imagined where it would lead. When I said they'll kill me if I return, and you said then you're staying right here, did you have any idea what you were getting yourself into?" Nora asked with a smile. "Not a clue," Ethan admitted, laughing, "but I'd make the same choice again. Every time." Their son, William James Abbott, was born in the winter, a strong, healthy boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Margaret Rose. Lucy became Aunt Lucy to the children, a constant presence in their lives as the years passed. Knights Ferry grew steadily, benefiting from increased trade and travel. The Abbott family grew with it, respected members of the community whose story became something of a local legend, the brave woman fleeing injustice, and the cowboy who stood by her when it mattered most. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Ethan and Nora sat on the porch of their cabin, watching their children play in the meadow below. The Frontier Hotel and Saloon was now being managed day to day by capable staff, allowing them more time together as a family. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" Nora asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "If I hadn't run into your saloon that morning, if you hadn't helped me?" Ethan considered the question. "Sometimes. I might have kept drifting eventually, never putting down real roots, and you." "I might not have survived," Nora said simply. "Or if I had, I would have been running forever, always looking over my shoulder. Instead, we found each other." Ethan kissed her gently. "And everything that followed the danger, the fear, it was worth it for this. For our family. For the life we've built." In the meadow below, William called out excitedly, having discovered a rabbit's nest with newly born kits. Margaret followed her brother, her dark braids bouncing as she ran. Their voices carried on the warm summer air, a testament to the peace and security their parents had fought so hard to achieve. "Yes," Nora agreed, watching their children with a heart full of contentment. "Everything we went through was worth it for this." And in that moment, with the setting sun painting the hills gold and the sound of their children's laughter rising from the meadow, they knew with absolute certainty that they had found what most people spend their lives searching for: not just safety or success, but true belonging. A place and a person to call home.